Rope from 1948 is arguably one of Alfred Hitchcock's boldest ideas ever. He set out to make a film that looked like it was all done in the one take. How did it work out? Well, let me just say it is one of my favourite Hitchcock films ever made. And we'll find out what we all think here on the Golden Hour Film Podcast. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Golden Hour Film Podcast. Yes, it's Rope. I have been buzzing to talk about Rope since we basically started the 40s Hitchcock arc, which is coming to an end soon. It's coming to an end next week with Under Capricorn. Hopefully we love that film. But I can tell you, I definitely loved Rope. And when I say we, of course, I'm not just referring to myself. I'm also referring to my co-host, not guest host, Shane Mulvaney.
How you doing, Harry? Yeah, you've been eagerly anticipating this week for a long time, so good to have it come around finally.
Yeah, no, for those who don't know, Rope, I was trying to figure it out. Besides, like, the early Disney cartoons, I think Rope might be the first, like, old film I ever saw as a kid. I watched Rope when I was, like, 7 years old. And I was like, this is class. Probably because it's like 80 minutes long, so for a 7-year-old, that's enough. That's enough runtime to keep me stimulated. You know, it's got a pretty breakneck pace, and it is, it's memorable for so many reasons. It's Alfred Hitchcock, obviously. It stars Jimmy Stewart, obviously. It's Hitchcock's first Technicolor film. It's all made to look like it's shot in one take, which we'll talk about in a second. And of course, it's all about the perfect murder.
Yeah, the first Hitchcock movie that properly deals with the idea of the perfect murder. There've been a few films before now that have alluded to kind of characters alluding to the perfect murder without actually trying to pull it off. But this is the first of probably 3 Hitchcock films in which a character does try to pull off the perfect murder, and a lot of people's favourite of those 3 films as well.
Yeah, it's a lot of people's favourite for a load of reasons, to be honest. Sorry, just 1 second there. It's probably a lot of people's favourite for a lot of reasons, to be honest. And 3 of the main reasons are the 3 lead performances, I feel. The 2 main leads, if you will, John Dall and Farley Granger, are both unbelievable in this film. And they, like, similar to how you loved Notorious, for me it's the same with Rope. The text and then the subtext throughout the film, particularly between these 2 characters, is just handled so well. And then of course, you know, you just got Jimmy Stewart. Yeah, he's incredible, as he always is. He's Jimmy Stewart.
His first, I believe, I'm pretty sure, first Hitchcock film, first of 4 Hitchcock films. Again, probably a lot of people's favourite. Obviously, Vertigo's up there. Like, I mean, Rear Window. This is a guy who's probably been in 3 of the greatest Hitchcock films. What's the other one? The remake of The Man Who Knew Too Much, which is a good film as well.
The Man Who Knew Too Much.
But certainly, Rear Window, Rope, and Rear Window are 3 of the greatest Hitchcock films. And a lot of that is to do with Jimmy Stewart. He's just an absolute legend.
Yeah, amazing actor, and he always plays his characters very well, and particularly in this film, he portrays his character's intelligence so well. You can see when he realizes things, and he doesn't do it over the top. All he has to do is kind of like lift his eyebrows whenever he spots a character going in a certain direction, or he'll just kind of stop what he's saying and he'll turn his head slowly whenever he hears a conversation. He plays the intelligent professor so well.
Which is funny because apparently he wasn't. I mean, most actors are their own worst critics anyway. They don't really like watching themselves. But apparently, Stewart, when he saw this film the first couple of times, he wasn't really into his own performance, and he would later talk about how he thought someone like a Gregory Peck would be a better fit because he looked more studious. He looked more like a professor, I suppose, would, and spoke like a professor would. So, but no, I think he's. Maybe, I don't know if he's being too modest.
I think
he's brilliant. Yeah, he's brilliant in the role. I can't imagine anyone else in the role, really, once you see him.
Yeah, we've a few people who are all returning to the podcast here. There's a few characters who we have dealt with in smaller roles before. to say the least. For instance, good old Sir Cedric Webster Hardwicke.
Yeah, Cedric Hardwicke. Yeah.
Remember his character from Suspicion? Jesus, forgot the name of that film for a second.
Is he?
So he is the dad
Yes.
of David in this film.
Yeah, no, in Suspicion. No, I don't remember his character from Suspicion. No.
Yeah, no, he plays the father in
I was
Suspicion.
going to say
He
that.
plays Joan
Yeah, I
Fontaine's
was literally
father.
about to say that,
yeah,
but I was
yeah,
doubting myself then. Yeah.
yeah. It's our first time dealing with Jimmy Stewart on the podcast somehow.
Ooh, well, we didn't do him during the Euros podcast, and they're the
No.
only films that we've done other than Hitchcock, I think. No,
Yeah.
you did the.
Butch Cassidy's
He's
not
not
in
in
that.
that now, so yeah, this is the first Jimmy Stewart
Yeah,
film.
somehow this is our first time covering Jimmy Stewart, and as well Farley Granger, who is a seriously underrated actor. He's also in Strangers on a Train, and he's in The Prowler, one of the first cool slasher films from the 80s or 70s? 80s.
Strangers in the
When
Train.
did The Prowler come out?
Oh, shit.
Anyway.
Strangers in the Train also about a perfect murder. So apparently Hitchcock saw something in Farley
Yeah.
Granger that made him think that this guy could be maybe an unwitting accomplice to a perfect murder.
Yeah, that seems to be his typecast role, is the guy who commits the murder. He doesn't want to
Doesn't
commit
really
the murder,
want
but he
to.
kind of has
Yeah,
to commit the murder.
exactly.
Yeah, and then obviously the big thing that a lot of people talk about with this film is the homosexual subtext.
Yeah.
Pretty much, it's still quite a sensitive subject because John Dall, who plays
He plays
Brandon.
Brandon,
he was he was rumored to have been gay, but he never actually was out as gay, whereas Farley Granger was out as bisexual throughout his career. I think throughout all of his career.
Yeah, he was. Yeah.
And unfortunately, this film didn't do very well at the box office somehow. And basically, the homosexual subtext was what everyone was saying was the reason as to why this didn't perform at the box office, which I think is why nowadays this is becoming like a cult, not a cult classic, but like everyone's one of most people's favorite underrated Hitchcock films. And the only reason it's underrated is because it was so ahead of its time.
The other
But yeah, no, it's... Sorry, go ahead.
So yeah, the other major thing to say about this as well is that it's based on a real case of murder. Basically, in the 1920s, two guys named in 1924, two guys named Nathan Leopold and Robert Loeb, who were lovers. They were handsome lovers, gay. They were both gay. They were in a relationship together. They killed a 14-year-old boy just to prove that they could, and obviously they didn't get away with it. But when they were obviously found guilty, there was a massive outrage against the gay community and against, obviously, like, there's a lot of pearl clutching to do with that stuff. But obviously, their case made national headlines and actually inspired a play titled Rope's End that came out in 1929. And then this film is then an adaptation of that play, Rope's End. That's why it's called Rope. And obviously then, yeah, we'll see in the film why. It's pretty overt reference to a rope, but that's the real case. Similar to how, obviously, Shadow of a Doubt was based on the true story of a real serial killer. Hitchcock, again, pulling from the real-life headlines to craft this story.
Yeah, and as well, we've already mentioned it, but the film is shot so look like it's all in one take, which was a huge feat for Hitchcock to attempt, and it was pretty much impossible at the time because cameras ran out of film after 10 minutes
10
at the time.
to 12 minutes.
So,
so it was literally impossible.
So I think
pretty much, I think it was just it was literally just out and out impossible to achieve.
So the longest take, I think, is like 10 minutes and 6 seconds or something in the film. I think that's the longest take in it. But other than one particularly overt and purposeful hard cut, the rest of it is kind of made to look like it's all the one take. And yes, there's lots of pushing in on people's jackets and pushing back out again. But listen, it's 1948 and the fella's camera is about to die every 10 minutes. he's done something pretty impressive. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no, I was going to say just one quick thing to talk about in the original plays, which is that the character of Rupert Cadell, who is played by Jimmy Stewart, in the original play, apparently that character had an affair with one of the two guys. So there's also that kind of that subtext to that as well. So it doesn't really come across. I think some people have kind of read into it a little bit in the film. It didn't really come across to me, I'll be honest. But that's not to say it's not obviously the case. But yeah, so that's one little thing to keep in mind as well if you're watching the film. Maybe you'll spot something one of us haven't.
Yeah, I think maybe the subtext there with regards to the film is more so that Brandon was maybe obsessed with Rupert whenever he was one of his students, but it doesn't feel reciprocated.
Yeah, it's not on Rupert's part. It's not a romantic kind of relationship. Definitely not. I think he's more just thinking about it from an intellectual point of view, maybe.
Yeah. And I reckon we get on into the narrative. So yeah, the credits roll, and then allegedly, Alfred Hitchcock cameo, his first of two.
Yeah.
For some reason, this is like a big dispute as to whether or not that was Hitchcock walking along the path. The writers of the film were like, yeah, no, that was Hitchcock. But then the producers of the film were like, the producers of the film said, no, the only Hitchcock cameo is the silhouette towards the end in the background. That's the only one. So it may have been Hitchcock. It may not have been Hitchcock. It's not very important to the narrative. Also, some pretty great eerie music. And murder. Someone's been murdered straight away. We go from the street up onto a balcony. We turn and we look into this apartment, and then we go into the apartment, and there's a dude getting strangled by a rope.
Yeah, so the guy shrieks out just as the camera's still outside the window. You can just hear like someone just obviously cry for help kind of thing. And then we cut inside the apartment, and Brandon and Philip they've already killed someone. We don't know who yet, but they've killed someone. They've strangled them with a rope. And they take a beat down, obviously, to just obviously kind of recount what they've done, just kind of recollect themselves. Brandon kind of looks a lot more sure of himself, and he starts to light a cigarette. And then Philip, he kind of looks harder to read. He looks maybe a little bit more unsure of himself, maybe even a little bit remorseful at this point.
Yeah, I think Farley Granger plays Philip, and then John Dall plays Brandon. I think Farley Granger is so good at playing. Like, it starts off somewhat subtle.
Yeah.
Not very, but somewhat subtle. And in the end, it's like his character, you can't even call it an arc. His character, like, crumbling to pieces throughout the film is so interesting. Like, his individual performance is just so interesting to watch, even in the background throughout the film. Like, you can watch, it's an 80-minute film. You can watch this film so many times, and if you just watch a character, even in the background throughout, you'll get a different experience every time you watch it. It's so good.
Yeah, he's a brilliant performance. I think John Dall is great in it as well, for obviously different reasons. He's much more invested in pulling off this perfect crime, and for very different reasons, his arc is really good as well. And totally believe the fact that this guy was just a cold-blooded murderer, really.
Yeah, and it's only one of a handful of John Dall's performances in film. I think he did less than 10 films. He was a theatre actor. He wasn't a film actor at all. His career was on stage, which, I suppose if there was a film at the time that was going to lend stage actors and
that's true.
That would lend the same attributes that make a great stage actor to the camera. It's this. This basically is a play.
Yeah, it's just a film play, pretty much.
And yeah, as you said, so Brandon is pretty chuffed for himself. He literally, after they start to slowly get rid of the crime scene. So first they put David, who is their college friend, who they've just murdered with this rope. They put him in this chest, and then he turns on a light, and Philip is like, no, please turn it off. Philip's got a whole load of things going on, it seems, and one of his things is he hates lights in his eyes. It actually happens a couple of times in the film. He says, no, please turn that off. So Brandon goes over and he opens the curtains and he just goes, oh, What a wonderful evening. Meanwhile, Farley Granger's already sweated about 10 kilos. Like, he's stressed. He is a stressed
Very
individual.
tightly wound.
And, yeah, very much so. And Philip then takes the gloves that were a part of the crime, and he hides them in the checkbook drawer. And basically, until we start kind of get the rest of the characters, they're just basically talking about how Brandon wants to commit the perfect murder because he feels that himself and Philip are so intellectually above everybody else that they should be able to commit murder, particularly if they can get away with it. Then why is it such a bad thing if they're so much smarter than everyone else? They're on a different intellectual plane to everyone else. Philip is like, oh God, I don't think we should have done that. Anyway, so whilst they're having these kind of back and forth discussions, which begin as discussions and turn into heated arguments later on in the film, they are just kind of miscellaneously putting each object that was to do with the killing in random drawers around the apartment so that, not to draw any suspicion. Which there's a really interesting part later on in the film, which is so clever, which we'll talk about in a bit when one of the items is taken out of a drawer. But again, I said we'll talk about that later. Basically, the rope gets put into a drawer in the kitchen. The gloves are in the checkbook drawer. David is in a chest.
Yeah, and that's Brandon's, like, Brandon basically refers to this as being his masterpiece. So, like, the kind of the finishing kind of flourish to his whole plan, which is that he wants this party to go on as everyone is standing around this chest with a dead body in it, because obviously the best way to finish off the evening, he says, the trail of a dead body standing away, feet away, so that they get away with murders. Like, he finds this whole idea so attractive, that people will be just feet away from this crime that he's committed, this murder that he's committed, and they won't know that, they won't have a single clue. So he's clearly a sociopath, let's put it that way. Maybe a psychopath, I'm not sure which. So then he gets some candlesticks and he puts them onto the box, kind of to decorate it almost. Like, again, just another sign of his kind of his fascination with this whole plan of his. And then Philip is fixing the books, he notices something. So basically, the rope that could reveal the dead body. That's when they put it away, and then the doorbell rings, and Mrs. Wilson, who is basically like I suppose she's their maid kind of thing.
Yeah, she is.
She's their maid. So she arrives. She's after being sent on an errand to get some stuff for the party. So what they do is they put a dining cloth over the table so that no one can see inside, obviously, as well, in case they can see about his fucking head inside the box or something. But yeah, Mrs. Wilson doesn't seem too impressed by having to go on this errand for the lads. And then Brandon just starts getting cocky and he puts the rope in the kitchen room drawer, as Harry said. And then Philip then seems disturbed to learn that Rupert Cadell, who was one of the professors from university, that he's going to be coming to the dinner, because he said, look, this guy's the only person who's going to be able to kind of put this together. He's going to be the only person to put two and two together, because he's a really smart dude, basically. And Brandon says, he is the only one likely to figure it out, which is exactly why he should come, because it kind of makes him excited by the fact that there's going to be someone there who could figure this thing out. It almost makes the crime even more perfect for him.
Yeah, as well, there's a load of little things that they do, particularly Brandon, that are so... They're clearly... It's a funny one where you see so many characters who are meant to be intelligent, and they actually, like, some of the things they do just make sense. For instance, Philip goes to put the lock on the chest, and Brandon goes, no, don't lock it. Like, if there's a lock on it, then it's more suspicious. We'll just not put a lock on it. And as well, when it comes to the invites, Brandon, after killing David, he has invited David's parents, David's, I think fiance or soon to be fiance. They mentioned that they're practically engaged, but I don't know if they actually are engaged. And then her fiance's ex, who is also his former best friend, as well as Rupert. And as well, he also says, Rupert can figure this out, but also Rupert is the only person intelligent enough who might actually agree with us. He might get it. So there is this underlying obsession that Brandon has with Rupert, maybe because he's the only person he deems to be intellectually on the same level as himself. And as well, another clever thing is when Mrs. Wilson comes back, she's like, "Oh, but like I've already set up the entire kitchen table. Why would you go to the effort of moving things into the onto the chest? Like it's already set up for you." And he's like, "Oh no, I just think it would be better if we have it in here." And she's like, "No, that's ridiculous. They're gonna find it ridiculous." And it's funny because these guys have literally sent her out to do a day's worth of errands so that they
Just to get her out of
can
the
get the
apartment.
house ready. Yeah, like even she is kind of like,
That's sus.
yeah, no, there's something not right
That's
going on
sus.
here. There's something unsettling about this party. And also, he's got champagne, and that's a big deal at the time. You only had champagne if you were celebrating something
Really big
big.
occasion, yeah.
And
He
yeah,
also says, Brandon, about Rupert, that he actually considered inviting him to take part in this kind of murder pact,
yeah,
but that he wouldn't have had the stomach. He said he knows, like, he probably would agree with us ideologically about this perfect murder, like, we're on a higher intellectual plane. So he thinks that Rupert would actually agree with him, but he just says, look, he wouldn't have had the stomach, and yeah, he would have he would have kind of ruined it on us. So that's the only reason that he didn't actually invite Rupert. So already we've learned so much about Rupert, and obviously a little bit about the other guests as well, but certainly about Rupert, even a good while before he even turns up on screen. So it just means that when Rupert does arrive, you already know so much about his backstory, about his kind of intellectual capacity, that then you're just instantly drawn in every time Jimmy Stewart, and it's Jimmy Stewart anyway. I mean, you're going to be drawn in anyway. But especially when you have a character like this who we know, because the lads have said, we know is smart enough to figure this thing out, then it just means that it's set up perfectly, his arrival.
yeah. And some of the guests start to arrive. So Kenneth arrives first, who sort of the four of them, Brandon, Kenneth, David, who's dead, and Philip. The four of them were all sort of in the same class, although they were kind of slagging David, saying that David wasn't the most intellectual or the most studious, or but some of his actual friends, his parents, would be like, no, actually, he was studious. He just didn't have to study. He was that intelligent that he didn't need to study with you guys, which was an interesting take as well. But Kenneth arrives first, and Philip is still just absolutely shitting a brick over the idea that Rupert's coming. So he goes over to the piano, and we learn that he's a pianist. And after this party, he is going to Brandon's mother's house to basically go and practice and practice and practice, because he's got a big piano recital at town hall. It's kind of his, for want of a better expression, it's his coming out party as a pianist. It's his first big gig, and everyone's saying it's great, and that's what the party is for. Is for him getting his first big gig at town hall as a pianist. Hence the champagne.
Yeah, and then Janet, obviously, who was David's fiance, or certainly serious girlfriend, once she sees Kenneth, she's a bit like, obviously, a bit unsure, because maybe they didn't end things in the right way. And then, anyway, Brandon, who's a bit of a dick, as we found out, even leaving aside his murderous ways, he starts to kind of like twist the knife, and he says that Janet's only with David for his money. And he basically out and says that he wants to. He actually says, there was one comment he makes where he says, "Oh, I have a feeling that David's not going to come tonight," which again
Yeah.
is a kind of a stupid thing to say if you don't want to get any suspicion thrown your way. But again, it's another example of Brandon just getting a little too comfortable for his boots, getting a little too cocky and confident, and oh yeah, these aren't clever enough to figure it out, even though I'm dropping all these little hints that something's gone wrong. But yeah, he basically says that he wants to reunite Kenneth and Janet, um, because he thinks that would be even funnier than David's out of the picture, meaning he's dead. So he thinks it'd be even funnier than if he was the one who reunited Janet and Kenneth at this party. And we say that we learn then that Rupert thinks that is a privilege for the few, meaning that he basically shares a similar laissez-faire philosophy towards kind of crime, as we figured out. Mr. Kentley and his sister, Mrs. Atwater, arrive. So basically, Mr. Kentley is David's father, and Mrs. Atwater
Yeah.
has come in place of Mrs. Kentley, who's can't make it for whatever reason. I think she's at home still. So she's the sister
Yeah.
of Mr. Kentley. And it turns out then that as they're walking the door, then we see Philip, who's cut his hand with a glass because he's just so nervous. He's an absolute nervous wreck. And
But he cuts his hand because she comes in. She goes, "Oh, David."
yeah,
She mistakes him for David, and again, like this whole film, he's just absolutely shitting a brick, and he's like, and just stabs himself with a martini glass.
he's a nervous wreck, an absolute nervous wreck.
Yeah.
So yeah, like things aren't going well for Philip. And then Mrs. Atwater comes in and she says to Philip, "Look, I'm an amateur astrologist. I'm going to give you a reading." And he's trying to act cool, obviously at this stage. So he's like, "Okay, yeah." So she says to him, "These hands will bring you great fame." And obviously that could mean two things. It could mean that his piano career, his pianist career goes really well and he becomes like a really famous, acclaimed pianist. Or it could mean that, look, less than an hour beforehand, he's literally killed a dude with his hands, having strangled them with a rope. So maybe he gets caught, and maybe that crime, then obviously people are going to know that he strangled someone. That's what they mean by these hands. So again, that's just something that kind of, it's again another moment of Philip just getting so much more wound tightly and just like he's just ready to explode at any moment, because obviously he doesn't really know how to take this thing.
And at the same time as well, Janet is kind of starting to panic that David's not there, because they were all saying that David is like a really good timekeeper and it's so out of his character to be late for something. And it's the first time that Brandon kind of gets caught in a lie, and they say, he said he was going to come and meet you guys, did he not? And Brandon says, no, he said he was coming with you guys. And they were like, no, he said he was going to meet you guys here by himself. So then he comes up with this story that, maybe he went to a club and he found someone there, and that's his plan instead for the evening. But Janet's not having that. She doesn't believe it. So she goes into the kitchen to call David's mother, who obviously wasn't able to make it, to see if he perchance maybe made it back to hers. And yeah, already this grand plan is starting to unwind, because they're already like, no, actually David would never be late. No, I don't think he would go to a club. Actually, Brandon, I think you're wrong. So his lies are already starting to fail.
Yeah, it's not going well for Brandon. And then, just to kind of illustrate that point further, Rupert finally arrives to the party. About 28 minutes into the film, we see the great Jimmy Stewart make his entrance, and he greets the other guests. He knows a couple of them, and he doesn't know a couple of them. Then he actually comments on the champagne again, like you said earlier. He said, that's very expensive champagne for an occasion like this. So immediately then he's like, bam, that's one little mark that he can kind of point towards. Then we actually get a really funny self-referential scene from Hitchcock. I talked last week about there's a scene in Notorious, which a couple of weeks ago, a scene in Notorious which features kind of a callback to a moment from Suspicion, which is like a self-referential Hitchcock moment. And this is even more so self-referential moment, because basically a full 2-3 minute scene between Rupert, Mrs. Atwater and Janet basically talking about this film. We'd never heard of the name Notorious, but it's clear that that's who they're talking about. They talk about a film with Cary Grant, and about Ingrid
Bergman, and it's the one with the one name, the what you call it. That's what they keep. Yeah,
it's the something of the something. No, I think it's just something. So yeah, it's a very funny scene. Clearly, Hitchcock having a bit of fun with the fact that obviously Notorious was one of his biggest hits, critically and commercially, and obviously. And one more thing while we're on the Cary Grant topic, apparently Hitchcock kind of reached out to him about the part of Rupert, but he passed. So yeah, that's how Jimmy Stewart ended up getting the role for his first role with Hitchcock. But yeah, it's a very funny, like I said, self-referential moment where Hitchcock is just having a bit of fun, maybe a bit of a pat in the back for himself as well, about the fact that Notorious was such a big hit, and then he has like a few of his characters talking about Notorious. So funny little moment from Hitchcock there.
Yeah. And as well, just before that scene with Jimmy Stewart's kind of grand entrance, up until this, Brandon has, at the very least, acted as if he is the most intelligent man in the room. And as soon as Rupert comes in and starts questioning him on the champagne, he starts stuttering and he can't actually get an excuse out. And he just makes a little dig at him. He's like, "Oh, you always did stutter when you got excited,
Yeah.
didn't you?" And then they were all kind of asking him like, "Oh, what about like David and Kenneth? Like, what was it like teaching them?" And he was like, "Oh, well, with Brandon here, you wouldn't be able to sleep at night because of some of the stories he told." And there was a story called the Mistletoe Bough, which was basically about a woman who on her wedding day got so excited that she got into her dress, and the husband was coming or something, so she went to hide and she hid in the chest, and the chest locked itself on her. And then 50 years later, they found her, and it was her skeleton inside. And she went missing on her wedding day, which was obviously, they were actually stood next to the chest that David was in whilst they were having this conversation. So it was just another really clever bit of subtext where he doesn't realize it yet, but he's already got Brandon on the back foot, and he's only been in the door 20 seconds.
Clearly, like, very, very smart individual, Rupert, just very intellectually sound. So yeah, and then another story that Brandon actually ends up coming out with. They're kind of all sitting around the sitting room or the dining room, and Brandon then starts to recount the story of Philip from a few years earlier, where he basically on a farm he starts strangling chickens, and then Philip, who's already obviously, as we know, a massive, just he's a mess at this point. He snaps and he's like, that didn't happen, you're a liar. And Rupert then is like, that's strange. Like, I mean, it's kind of a humorous story, even though it's obviously strangling chickens. Kind of a humorous story that Brandon was presenting it with. But yeah, he's like completely overreacted in terms of what you would think an appropriate response would be. And Rupert's like, yeah, that's...
And this is the first part of the film this is the only part of the film where there's a hard cut. Where whenever Philip's like, that didn't happen, I've never strangled a chicken, it just cuts straight to Rupert's reaction. And he sits back and he's like, And I think this is the moment where the ball starts to roll in Rupert's head, where he realizes there's something really awry going on at this party, and that these two guys have done something very suspicious.
Yeah, I think he's been observing with interest, without obviously having any evidence whatsoever that, like, yeah, there's something a bit strange going on. But this is the first moment where he probably starts to put two and two together. But anyway, he doesn't really tip his hat as of yet, and he then starts to kind of have a bit of fun with the guests, where he's saying, kind of similar to what Brandon's own beliefs, where he starts to say that murder would solve many problems, including unemployment and standing in line for theatre tickets. Obviously a bit tongue-in-cheek there. And then he says that murder is an art which should be reserved for quote-unquote superior individuals. Brandon then just piles on because he sees this as his opportunity to kind of bond with Rupert on another level, and he's like, yeah, victims are inferior beings and they won't be missed. And Rupert says there should be murder seasons, which then that's the moment where Mr. Kentley, who's David's dad, doesn't obviously know his son has passed away at this point, but he's just like, listen, I cannot sit here while you two pillocks start talking about this. He's like, let's drop this whole subject. I don't want to hear anything about this. But it's pretty clear during this whole conversation, it's pretty clear that Rupert, maybe he doesn't necessarily not believe it, maybe he does kind of identify with these beliefs, but nowhere near to the amount of passion as Brandon does. So
yeah, Rupert almost kind of jokes about it, because he
joke.
even says to Brandon, "Oh, do you plan on doing away with a few inferiors after the party?" Like he has the same beliefs to an extent. I think it's more, he says it in like a comical way about like, oh, when you have like a real petty issue, you should just be able to murder the person. Oh, is the line too long in the cinema? You should just be able to murder the person in front of you. Oh, is the bus taking too long? You should just murder the driver when he gets there. Whereas Brandon's like, yes, you should. You should so be able to murder them. You're so right, Rupert. And Janet says, so Janet and Kenneth now have kind of gone to a side because everybody's quite uncomfortable after this conversation, and they've all sort of parted away.
He pulled her aside
and
for
Janet
a chat.
And Kenneth.
He pulled her aside for a chat in the Love Island villa.
Oh yeah, it's essential. She got a text. And she was told that she had to pull him for a chat. Yeah. she pulls Kenneth for a chat and basically says that, well, first of all, we find out, because it was sort of alluded to that it was the other way around, but it was actually Kenneth that dumped her. Whereas Brandon was kind of making it out like, oh, yeah, you left Kenneth for David's money. But no, Kenneth actually dumped her. And she says that she feels as though she is the reason that Kenneth and David aren't friends anymore. And she just wants everybody to be friendly again. And Kenneth is like, do you know what? It's fine. What's in the past is in the past. I dumped you. You went off with my best friend. We can all just be friends now whenever David gets here, you know. We'll all make things up. It'll be okay. And
Just to piggyback on that point,
oh
just
yeah.
a tiny bit, coming back to the scene where then Mr. Kentley's obviously asking them all to drop it. Brandon then starts to get carried away again, and he starts ranting about superior beings. And then he's like, "Oh, I'm sorry guys, I got a bit carried away there." He obviously knows he's read the room completely wrong, especially when it comes to Rupert. And then Rupert's like, again, Rupert's. This is probably the moment again where he's like, "Are you actually planning on committing a murder here, like Brandon?" And Brandon
Yeah.
obviously says, "Oh no, it's just a bit of fun, just a bit of fun." But I think again, it's another moment then of Rupert, um, knowing something is seriously wrong with this dude, and maybe something's happened, or at least he's planning on something serious. But yeah, come back to then that Kenneth and Janet chat. Yeah,
Yeah, and then after the chat again, Brandon comes over, reads the room terribly, kind of winds the two of them up, and they storm off away from him in a huff. And Rupert comes up to him, and again, just another great line. Just goes, "Something gone wrong, Brandon," kind of alluding to that Brandon has a plan, and everything he's doing is calculated, and that wasn't in the plan. To Brandon again on the back foot straight away when he's talking to him, and Kenneth and Janet have realized now that there's definitely something going on with Brandon. Brandon clearly has some sort of plan, whether it's to get the two of them back together or whether it's something more sinister. He clearly has some sort of mischievous plan because he told one person one thing and one person the total opposite in order to try and get them to first chat with each other. And yeah, they realize that Brandon has basically lied through his teeth the second they got there, but they don't know why. And Rupert is not far behind them. And then Rupert goes over to chat to Mrs. Wilson, the maid, and she tells him that, yeah, no, it was pretty weird actually how earlier they gave me the whole afternoon uh, to do all these somewhat
menial
pointless
tasks.
tasks. She
Yeah,
had to go to like 3 different shops to find one cake, just for her to come back. And even though she'd set up the sitting room ready for the party, they had moved everything around to the chest of drawers, which he kind of turns and looks at. And again, the way Hitchcock does it is so great, where he's just kind of panning to whatever people are talking about. But it's the chest of drawers is like such an interesting thing in this film. Whenever someone stood next to it and Farley
yeah,
Granger is in the same shot, it is so entertaining to just watch him in the background, just like staring at them with his jaw hanging. It's so funny, but like so entertaining.
yeah. And then like coming back to that, then Philip Farley Granger obviously, he's just like he's so nervous when he sees Rupert and Mrs. Wilson chatting, and then he just interrupts and he's just talking very rudely to Mrs. Wilson, talking down to her, just belittling her, and then Rupert just then notices that kind of stern tone and that like just terrible attitude. It's another little point. The lads are not doing a good job of hiding this thing because time after time, in the space of a few minutes now, Rupert's just slowly building a case, even though he doesn't really know it yet. Slowly building a case of that's weird. That's a lot weirder. There's another weird thing that's going on there. So like,
Yeah, because he comes over and his excuse for almost giving out to Mrs. Wilson is, I just think that it's much easier for people to eat on top of this chest of drawers that you guys are stood next to, because then they don't have to go into the dining room to get food. And Rupert goes, yeah, but everyone's in the dining room right now. And he's like, and he just retreats to his piano.
yeah, and then
But Rupert doesn't let him off that easy. Rupert follows him over to the piano and starts grilling him basically with
yeah, he's
questions.
just absolutely interrogating him at this point. We actually hear at this point as well a police siren starts to go off outside, and then Philip is like, again, that's another thing like almost sets him off because just the sound of a police siren after knowing he's done what he's did. he seems nervous about that, like I said, and then Rupert tells Philip, look, just outright tells him, look, I suspect something's going on here. And Rupert says, Brandon knows. He said Brandon's been trying to set up Kenneth and Janet for unknown reasons. And he says, look, I know, Philip, I know you're lying. Just like you lied about not strangling chickens, because I'm the only person who can verify the fact that that story is true, even though you denied it. And Philip's just acting more and more agitated, more and more guilty, and more like just shifty as hell. And then Philip then notices then in the background Mr. Kentley tying up books with the rope that obviously they used to murder Mr. Kentley's son. And he just, again, he acts so weird about this whole thing. He just notices it. Rupert notices Philip then noticed the rope. And again, now he's like, why is he acting so weird about a rope tying some books? And some bells start to ring in his head, obviously. And then Rupert then notices Philip and Brandon in the middle of the room. Philip is telling Brandon, look, this is a bad idea, like, just acting so agitated. And Rupert then notices the two of them kind of having basically an argument, without, not exactly a scream match, but certainly an argument. And it's another moment where he's like, something so weird is going on here.
Yeah, he's like, why would the rope get your attention? And he's like, I just think it's a clumsy way of tying up books, that's all. But he's like so aggressive in his delivery. So then everybody's getting pretty agitated and pretty heated, and they all kind of move back over to where they were when they were having the chat about like inferior people and murdering people who are inferior to you. And we don't actually see any of this. Instead, we're just focused on the chest of drawers, and Mrs. Wilson, slowly but surely, is just taking one item, going across to the kitchen and putting it in the kitchen, coming back,
Genius.
taking another item, and it's just going back and forth, and it's basically just winding up the suspense. And then eventually there's nothing left, and the books that are all kind of sloppily left beside it, she goes to put them inside, and Rupert comes over to help her, and he lifts it up, and straight away, in fairness, in one of the few kind of smooth moments from the murderers, Brandon comes over and he's like, oh, don't worry about it. Like, he's not actually stressed. But then instead of that being what kind of ticks off Rupert, it's his reasoning. He was like, oh, you can just put them books in the chest tomorrow.
Yeah, it's so weird.
Like, yeah, I don't know about that. You may be acting cool, calm and collected, but your reasoning's not there. And again, it's just another moment of Brandon getting caught in a lie and not being as smart as he thinks he is, trying to get his way out of it. It's such an interesting character study on him.
Thinks he's
such an interesting character.
He thinks he's a lot more quick on his feet and able to like talk his way out of any situation. But then he obviously soon realizes that that's not the case, and things are spiraling a lot more out of control than he thought. And Philip especially is just acting like a nervous wreck, like we said, all day. And then exact at that moment, then Mrs. Kentley, there's a phone call. It's Mrs. Kentley, David's mother, who wasn't able to come. And then she's like, look, she's just so worried about David. He hasn't contacted her. He hasn't come home. Janet and Mr. Kentley are worried too, and they're like, look, we don't know where David is. We're really worried at this point, so we're going to go home and hopefully he comes back, or hopefully we can contact him. We can figure out where he is. We don't know where he is, so we're just gonna. There's no point of us being here enjoying a party when we're not really enjoying it because we're worried about our fiance and our son. So Janet says, Kenneth, look, do you want to come? And he's like, yeah, okay, yeah. So a little bit of a reconciliation between those two, even if it's not going to be a romantic one, as we know.
Yeah.
Certainly they're on better terms now than they were at the start of the party. So they leave, and Rupert then, he's going to leave as well. But turns out he picks up the wrong hat, and when he, I think it's Mrs. Wilson, I think, spots it, he says, no, that's not your hat. So he takes off the hat, and he looks inside, and he's like, oh, because the initials he sees on it says DK for David Kentley. So he knows David was at the apartment. And the lads obviously have denied seeing him all day. So he knows they've lied about that, if nothing else. So that's obviously the most suspicious thing. Of all these little tiny incremental things that have built up, and he's slowly been building a case, it's all just kind of circumstantial evidence. This is physical evidence that David was at the apartment, which they've obviously lied about, the lads. So he knows they're lying, but anyway, he says, look, he's going to leave. So yeah, he he leaves the apartment too, and the lads think, okay, finally everyone's gone. We're in the clear.
Yeah.
That was a close call.
Philip's still stressed though.
He's still so
'Cause
stressed.
Yeah. Philip gets mad now because he's like, all your little touches, you dick.
Yeah.
Could you not have told me about any of that stuff, like the rope or the chest of drawers, or any of these little touches of yours, like so unnecessary? And he's like, no, it's the perfect murder, and we're gonna get away with the perfect murder. As a matter of fact, we have gotten away with the perfect murder. And at this point, Philip has drank himself into a mess. He is pissed. He is so drunk. And he literally says, at least if I have a hangover tomorrow, it'll be mine.
Yeah.
As in, it's the first kind of thing that he's done that impacts himself and nobody else has interfered in his life. There's clearly, they clearly are a relationship,
Yeah.
but it's clearly a dominant relationship when it comes to Brandon's side of things, and Philip kind of just does whatever Brandon tells him to, which I think Philip is starting to crack under the pressure of that, as well as the pressure of trying to get away with murder. Not only is his life now so much more stressful than it needs to be, but his relationship is pretty much, for him anyway, it's on the ropes.
Apparently, that's also a moment that, well, a little kind of character beat that mirrors the real life case of Loeb and Leopold, Leopold and Loeb, because one of those guys was very much the controlling force in their relationship, and I can't remember which it was, but the other guy basically said, "Look, I would have done whatever he told me to do." Like, that's how obsessed I was with him, and how much I was just into the whole relationship. But yeah, so obviously, as Harry said, Phillips he's just going off the deep end on Brandon. But then Mrs. Wilson comes back and she says, I'm going to need a key for the morning if you're going to need me. And they say, yeah, we will. So she gets the key for the morning and then she leaves. And Brandon then calls down to the front desk or the front office and he says, look, send my car around. We're going to be going out. Obviously, the plan here is that they're going to be wheeling out they're going to try and either wheel out the box with David's dead body, or they're going to find some other method of getting him out of the apartment. So that they can go and dispose of his body. So that's what they do. But anyway, then the phone rings and Philip answers, and it's Rupert. And then as soon as he hears Rupert's voice, Philip again just won another moment.
Yeah, loses his fucking shit.
He's like, oh, it's Rupert. So Brandon comes over to the phone and he's trying to act as calm and as collected as he can. Rupert says he needs to come up. He's actually forgotten a box of matches. Or cigarette pack, sorry. He's forgotten a cigarette pack.
Yeah, cigarette case.
Yeah, he's forgotten a cigarette case. So obviously Brandon's trying to not give anything away. So it's like, that's no problem, Rupert. Yeah, come on up. We'll have a hear of you. So they both obviously know, or at least they have a suspicion that he knows more than he's after letting on. Like, so Phillips obviously agitated, but Brandon slaps him. He's like, get your shit together, kind of thing. So then Brandon's come on up. So Brandon then he kind of reveals a loaded gun, and he's like, clearly that's his insurance policy in case something was to go wrong here. So you can see him slide it into his jacket pocket. Obviously he doesn't want Rupert to know he has that. Then Rupert arrives and he walks over to the box, Rupert, and he kind of takes the cigarette box out of his jacket pocket and he slips it onto the table to make it look as if it was there all along. That's what he forgot.
Yeah, onto the chest that David's been hid inside.
Yeah, onto the chest. So that's obviously he obviously was looking for an excuse to get back into the apartment. So that's his excuse as to why he's here. So he's looking around. He's like, oh, there it is. So he picks it up and he's like, yeah, I found it. And then he's like, oh, any chance of a drink? I think even Brandon offers him a drink because he doesn't want them to.
Yeah, Brandon's like, oh, are you in a rush to leave? And Rupert's like, no. I'm actually not. I'll take a drink if that's okay. And Philip's like, really? Do you need a drink? And Rupert's like, yeah, no, I'll have a drink. And again, Brandon kind of lets it slip a little bit. He goes, oh yeah, I'll get you a short. And he's like, no, get me a long drink. Get me a long drink, will you? As in, even though Brandon's trying to act like
wants him there,
he's cool with him staying. He's still trying to get him at the door, and he can't come up with a good enough reason to sort of outsmart Rupert.
He's trying to act like a
And,
polite host, being like, "Oh, stay for a drink," but obviously he wants him out of there as soon as possible. So Rupert obviously knows this, and that's why he's asking for a long drink, because he wants an excuse to stay for as long as possible. Yeah.
Yeah, and he says something along the lines of, "Oh, Philip, you've been quite strange tonight." And Philip's like, "What do you mean strange?" And then he just turns and stares at the chest, like he's become like almost like a goblin. He doesn't even look human anymore. He's like contorting his face in a way where his eyes are like bulging out of his head and his jaw is like so low. Farley Granger like does this so well. He's just gone out. He's cracked. He's absolutely lost his
I wouldn't
marbles
exactly
at this
say
point.
I feel sorry
He just
for him.
can't stop staring at the chest.
Yeah, I wouldn't exactly say I feel sorry for Philip, because obviously he's just committed murder, but yeah, you can't help but maybe sympathise with him a tiny little bit, because clearly the physical...
He was in a very controlling relationship,
Yeah.
but at the end of the day,
and then
he murdered someone.
physically and emotionally, this whole evening has just been absolute torture for him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He clearly doesn't even seem like a particularly social butterfly anyway. Like, he doesn't seem to like other people's company. So, being at a party with the dead body of someone who you've just murdered still being in the room sounds like his actual idea of hell. And Rupert basically just starts grilling them, but he does it in an intelligent way where he's making it out as if, well, Janet had this theory actually that you guys kidnapped David. Is there any chance that you guys kidnapped David? And Brandon puts his hand in his pocket and he keeps it there. And again, Rupert just kind of clocks this in the corner of his eye and he's like, right, okay, so he has a gun, so I have to scale it back a bit. I have to be a little bit more gentle in my approach here to trying to get a confession out of them. And they get back onto the whole killing inferiors chat that they had earlier, and Brandon ends up asking Rupert the question, which kind of seals the deal. He asks Rupert the question, "Oh, well, you know, if you were to hypothetically have killed David, how would you have done it, Rupert?" And Rupert basically explains exactly how they killed David.
Exactly, yeah.
As the camera basically follows from the door to the coat rack where he found the hat, and then he comes in to where the drinks were, where they obviously got him to have a drink. They may have even poisoned him, or they put something in his drink. They brought him over to the chest of drawers. He was a strong man, so they had to hit him over the head with something. And then on his way back up, they obviously choked him. And then he realizes that Brandon's kind of clutching the gun a bit more now. And he then last minute he freestyles it and he goes, and they obviously just brought him down to the car park and drove off with him, whoever they were. And he's like, "Oh, but it was in broad daylight, Rupert. You wouldn't bring him down to the car park. You get seen." And Rupert's like, "Oh, you're so right. I wouldn't be able for this whole murder thing. I wouldn't know what they would have done, so I don't know where they would have hid the body."
And Philip again, just so agitated at this point. He just screams out, cat and mouse. But which is the cat and which is the mouse, which is a funny kind of like... Because he's right as well.
And he smashes his glass on the floor as well. Like, he just loses
He's gone. He's completely gone at this point. But it's an interesting kind of thing to talk about as well, because like he is right. They're both playing cat and mouse with each other, but it's kind of hard to tell. From second to second, one of them has the upper hand and then the other one has the upper hand. And obviously Rupert knows that Brandon has a gun in his pocket, but then Brandon knows that Rupert knows, but he's not saying that he knows. So they're both just playing a massive game of cat and mouse, and Rupert says, "Look, I wouldn't have thought you kidnapped David except for the gun." So Brandon's like, he just tries to laugh it off. He's like, "Oh, this little thing." He's like, "Oh, I didn't even kind of realise I had that," in a way.
Yeah, again, Rupert just outsmarting him and making him throw his own gun away. Like, he's basically tricked him into unarming himself, so that then Rupert can reveal that he has the rope in his pocket the whole time. And he doesn't even have to say anything at this point. Philip just goes, he knows, he's got it. He knows we killed him. He knows that we've just fucking murdered David. He fucking knows, man. He knows.
He just says,
it's so funny.
He knows.
He doesn't even say anything. He just pulls the rope out of his pocket, and that's it. Philip's confessed. That was his breaking point. The rope was his breaking point.
So yeah, Rupert managed to wrestle the gun off of Philip. I think Philip picked it up when Brandon discarded it.
Philip ran for it then whenever he pulls out the rope.
And then the gun kind of goes off, And Brandon tries to say that Philip's been coming, been becoming an alcoholic, and obviously at this point, like Brandon knows the game is up, but he's desperately trying to come for any reason as to convince Rupert that you're on the wrong track here, mate. He's like, Philip's been becoming alcoholic, and he's trying to make excuse after excuse. And then Rupert's like, look, I'm going to go for a Hail Mary kind of thing here, and if it turns out
And I hope
I'm wrong, and if I am, then I'll forget this whole thing happened. So he walks over to the chest, and there's still some books.
Brandon shouts at him. He goes, "I hope you like what you see."
Yeah.
Which is like an aw fuck moment, but also basically Brandon's last cry for help. Is I like literally, I hope you like what you see. I hope you end up siding with us.
So Rupert kind of takes a breath, and there's still some books on the table, so he just opens the chest and fucks the books off the chest. And we don't see the dead body, because obviously we saw it earlier, but we know that David's body is in there. That's the whole thing that the lads have been trying to obscure the whole film. So, look, Rupert at this point is just like, he's just distraught. I mean, he knew, but he didn't know. Obviously, he knew, but there was no physical evidence. He could kind of convince himself that
he didn't want to be right,
exactly. And Brandon's like, look, Rupert, you're the only guy who'll be able to understand what we've been doing here. You're the only guy who kind of knows our whole ideology here. And Rupert's just like disgusted with the lads. Obviously, he says, you've taken my words and you've twisted them into like a completely different meaning than what I intended. Obviously, that's like an intellectual exercise that we've been debating. But like murder is murder. It's a completely different proposition here.
Yeah, he says, "Did you think you were God, Brandon?" And that's the kind of the final nail in the coffin for him, because he then, like, as you said, the whole discussion, this whole film has been like, if you're smart enough to get away with murder and you're murdering someone who, as Brandon described David earlier on the film, is just a placeholder. He's just a placeholder in life. Is it such a wrong thing? Or is it just killing for the sport of it almost? But no, at this point he's like, no, you're just trying to play God. So again, Rupert just does such an intelligent thing. Instead of like trying to scuffle to the phone or anything, he just opens the window and just opens fire with the gun into the air. And you hear a crowd start to form.
Yeah. 3 shots into the air. Yeah. Lets off 3 shots into the air, because obviously he knows that's going to get people's attention. They're going to call the cops outside, and they're going to know it came from one of the apartments upstairs. So the jig is up for the lads. They know they don't have the gun anymore. They're not going to. Rupert's a fairly physically capable looking man, so they're not going to be able to exactly like overpower him. Even if they manage to get the gun off him, he probably knock one of them out and then scuffle with the other one maybe. So yeah, he has the reach. Jimmy Stewart, tall man. So yeah, there's a commotion outside obviously, and then we hear the police coming on their way. And then the film kind of just ends with the 3 lads in silence, because they know this is the end of the story. Philip is bereft. He's like, it's my whole life gone. Rupert is broken because of what he's had to witness this whole evening. And then Brandon's almost like unapologetic, almost like he's going out the way he wants to go. He just starts to pour himself a drink, and he's like, fuck it.
All 3 of them are so interesting, like where they are kind of, the way the blocking worked with this final shot. Philip kind of slumps over the piano, and it's kind of like that image there is kind of like what could have been for him. He could have been a great pianist. You have Rupert, who just slumps into his chair, and he almost slumps into the chair with his back to the camera, as if like he's almost like the audience. He's kind of like, oh fuck, I can't believe what's just happened in this film, pretty much. And then you have Cool As You Like still stood up, just polishing a glass. He's about to pour himself a drink. You have Brandon, who again, he's doing what he wants to do. He's gonna have a drink before he gets arrested. He wants to have probably a nice brandy or something before he gets arrested. And yeah, that's it. That's Rope.
That's Rope, yeah. Classic Hitchcock film for so many reasons. Not just the plot, but like the narrative device, the technical kind of accomplishment that it is, considering it's like shot as one take. It's a classic film and belongs on any list. I said on my review on Letterboxd, it belongs on any list of any films under 90 minutes long. Because if you're thinking about a film like, I just want to watch like a short kind of film that's going to grip me from the start. I don't want to spend too long watching it. Maybe I've only got a certain amount of time before bed or wherever you want to kind of watch. And you're thinking about a film under 90 minutes that you're like, right, I just want something that's going to really grip me from the start. Rope is your film because, this thing is just, it's a classic. There's no other word to describe it, really.
So what did you give Rope then in the end?
So I've given it 4 stars, which probably sounds a little bit on the harsh side. I know, maybe for you especially. I don't know. I saw it for the first time and I gave it 4 stars and I gave it 4 stars again this time. I'm not sure why. It's just the rating that came to mind, really. That's what I felt, so that's why I gave it. That's not to say I don't absolutely love it, because I do. I mean, anything 4 stars or above means I absolutely love the film, and I love Rope. It's a brilliant film.
Yeah, no surprises here. I gave it 5 stars. I think it's perfect. I genuinely think it's a perfect film. Again, for the runtime, for the acting, for the characters, for the subtext, the direction, the historical achievement. I just think it's a monumental accomplishment, and it's such an easy film to watch, and yet every time you watch it you get something different out of it, which is amazing. I think all 3 lead performances are amazing. I think the writing is amazing. There's so many like little Hitchcockian one-liners in there, like, oh, it's to die for, oh, I'd kill for that, like, and every time fucking Farley Granger just bugging out in the background. It's so great. I love, if you've seen Rope before, just the next time you watch it, just watch Philip in the background. He's so good. He's so good in this film. It's, as I've said, it's one of my core memories as a fan of Hitchcock, as a fan of older films, is seeing Rope for the first time at a very young age. Probably too young. Anyway. But it's such an incredible film. It's such an important film to me. I love it. And for me, it's one of Hitchcock's best ever. It's, without question, one of Hitchcock's best ever for me. I absolutely adore this film.
Yeah, and it's also
I don't adore.
Sorry, just
Under Capricorn.
Yeah, Under Capricorn. We'll talk about that next week. Under Capricorn's not exactly a great way to round off our Hitchcock 40s arc, but again, we'll come on to that next week. Just come back to Rope very quickly. It's not just so much about the perfect murder kind of things, but it's also like such detailed, kind of considered, in-depth discussions and kind of musings about morality, about kind of obviously the difference between right and wrong, because it's not just that murder's wrong, but it's also about this idea of kind of supremacy in a way, which also obviously was a big thing in the 40s with the war and stuff like that. A big thing obviously was the Aryan race, yada yada yada. Like everyone knew that's kind of a big thing. That's what obviously the Nazis wanted to achieve, and pretty much any film in this decade is dealing in some way with these kinds of themes. But Rope is very overt in what it's trying to say, which is that we can't be judge, jury, and executioner. It doesn't matter if you think you're on a different intellectual plane or higher intellectual plane. Like, everyone has a right to live these kind of things, and even Rupert, even the character of Rupert in this, admits that he's also had thoughts about, like, look, if you're a smarter person, you should have more leeway to do what you want, but even he comes around by the end. So he's obviously meant to be
basically like an intellectual class divide rather than a monetary class divide.
Like Rebecca, which is kicked off a 40s Hitchcock arc, and Under Capricorn, which we'll do next week, deal with more of the financial class divide and the social class divide. This, as Harry said, is more of an intellectual class divide. Like, I'm smarter than you, therefore I can do what I want to you, and you can't do anything about it, kind of thing. And the film is really takes its time to discuss these things in depth, and obviously then just completely give reasons as to why this whole kind of whole stance is like completely ridiculous.
Yeah, no, it's a very interesting social commentary, and then as well, the homosexual subtext is fascinating. It's fascinating to read about. I know I didn't get a chance to watch it. There's like a 30-minute documentary on the film, on the making of the film, which is like a sit-down interview with the writer of the film. and he talks about that a lot. So that might be worth a watch. I can't say for certain. I've not actually seen it myself, but I saw a few people recommending it. But yeah, that subtext is fascinating. I've seen there's like YouTube videos as well with millions of views talking about the subtext of Rope, because there's so much going on there. The class divide, and as well there's the subtext of like basically emotionally controlling relationships, physically controlling relationships, how coercive behavior can happen in relationships and can kind of lead, not necessarily good people in Philip's case, but like can lead people down a much darker path than they should be down. They should be playing piano at City Hall with all the talent that they have, but unfortunately they are led astray by a more coercive, controlling person who feels that they are of the higher class, the higher intellectual class that is. But also, these guys are also like mega rich in this film, like all of them are. So they didn't even think about money. Therefore, they don't have to think about money. So their class divide to them amongst each other is the intellectual class divide.
Yeah, costly and all of that.
Yeah. Rope.
That's Rope.
And yeah, so if you guys want to help us out in any way, shape or form with the podcast, there's plenty of ways you can do it. Head on over to our Instagram, follow us on Instagram, like all our posts. On YouTube, subscribe. If we hit 100 subscribers, that would be pretty fantastic. If we can get as many likes on this as possible, I don't know, what's a good like goal? How many likes do you want to get? Like 10? I'd take 10.
I'll take 10, yeah. I'll take 10.
Yeah, I'd take 10 likes. Come on, guys. Let's get 10 likes. And as well, just comments. What did you think of Rope? Is it your first time seeing it? Have you seen it a million times? What do you think of Farley Granger? What do you think of Jimmy Stewart? What do you think of everybody in this film? And John Dall as well. What do you think of Rope? And then next week, we are so blessed to be talking about Under Capricorn. It is our final film in the 1940s Hitchcock arc. It's coming to an end. Next week is the literal last lap of the Hitchcock arc.
I think there'll be a fair few people happy about that because, maybe for whatever reason, Hitchcock isn't their favourite director. And then they just like the Euros podcast. Sorry, the Euros, the classic film Euros on the Golden Hour Film Podcast. Got such a good reception, and like obviously we were picking from different countries, different genres as well, and yeah, it was a great kind of thing for us to do. So we're going to be kind of leaning more in that direction, as we said a couple of weeks ago. Cherry picking different directors and different genres, different kind of years. So it's not all going to be just one director from just one decade, mainly covering just one genre or two genres. It'll be as kind of diverse as we can make it, really, to give as many people an opportunity to check this podcast out as they can, and let us know what they think.
But yeah, in the meantime, that's been the Golden Hour Film Podcast, and we will see you all next week for Under Capricorn. I've been Harry Bailey.
I've been Shane Mulvaney.
And we'll see you next week. Goodbye.